So I'm actually going to start with a middle-aged French white man, and just to quote him, to begin by a quote, in his essay, Before Image, Before Time, The Sovereignty of Anachronism, Georges Didier Huberman says to look at an artwork, he uses the word image, but I prefer artwork, to make a moment, to linger with its evocations, is to desire, to wait, to be before time. He immediately follows that with a not insignificant question, but what kind of time? I would like to use the next 15 minutes or so, kindly offered to me, to address exactly this question in relation to three Baltic artists of roughly the same generation, Estonian sculptor Anu Poder and Lithuanian photographers Algirdas Šeškus and Virgilijus Šonta, and hence in relation to the broader inquiry into the Archimedean point from which we can hopefully reconfigure or configure a common shared post-war Baltic history or multiple histories. It is the formal, material, and temporal techniques to be sensed in the artworks of these incredible artists that were produced in the late Soviet period, roughly from the early 1970s to the independence of the Baltic states in 1990. In the case of Anu Poder, beyond this somewhat arbitrary mark, well into the 90s, not least with her Tongues series. It is these techniques of addressing time and of a shared quiet refusal to be contemporary or to explicate it further, to be contemporary with the demands of a specific time, that for me form a latent dialogue between their art practices. Their reception in the late Soviet era and their continued uncentrality or somewhat irrelevance to the respective national modern art histories and indeed the European post-war art history in the wake of the collapse of the Soviet Union was marked by a lack of institutional interest until the early 2010s, with perhaps the exception of Šonta's series of photographs upholding the humanistic photographic tradition that was accepted at the time of the making by the official figures. This marks their artworks in friction with their historical time and not least with its subsequent narration. All three, Poder, Šonta, Šeškus, took the artwork's temporal, material, and formal qualities seriously. One only needs to dwell with the beams of light searing through young men's naked bodies, protecting their identities by the use of photographic overexposure, as Šonta documents the erotic cruising practices of transnational cruising communities of gay men, those actions that were criminalized under Soviet rule and afterwards as well for quite some time, or the jutting hand of on the left and Mike at the top of the frame in this photograph by Algirdas Šeškus, sucking all self-seriousness out of the decorated military general's speech and posture as he addresses the Lithuanian SSSR TV audience sitting behind an unbefittingly small, wonky table, accentuated by Šeškus's intently haphazard, irregular composition of the shot. Šeškus carves out space for a temporality of the particular incident through his photographs within the highly ideological, overdetermined space of two apparatuses, the ideological state apparatus that the TV channel was, and the technical medial apparatus that was the Lithuanian SSR TV station. I might add a note that Šeškus worked as a TV operator there from the 70s until mid-80s. And last, but far from the least, are the temporal decaying sculptures of Anu Poder. Very old memories from 1985, to take just a single artwork from her extraordinary body of work, provokes the viewer to act as a voyeur. It lures one to play out their fantasies or actually their sublimations. Do we see a maternal embrace or an act of coitus? Are the bodies resting and caressing or clinging, grabbing violently. Not least, the fabric folds act as boundaries, as spaces that belong to neither of the entities. The beige hues blur them further, making it no longer obvious which quote-unquote body needs the other more. A very old memories plays with the viewer's desire to define the visible sculptural forms as two distinct and gendered human bodies. Outwitting this representational regime of looking, the artwork mirrors back this gaze onto the voyeur. In terms of gender identities, roles, and their asymmetric dynamics, through matter, the artwork puts the viewer in unpleasant proximity to their own need to define what they see in binaries. Very old memories engenders multiple incompatible scenarios of intersubjective relations. That is to say, temporalities that cannot take place at the same time, that displays the logic of either or. It frustrates the eye seeking to determine, to affix in place, to extract the artist's biographical facts from the work's subject matter. I could go on and on and on, and yet, speaking of time, it would be much nicer to give more time to the discussion. So what I'm getting at here is that close readings of Poder's, Šontas, and Šeškus's artwork's formal and material qualities suggest at least this one thing. They're not just social artifacts of their time, as important as they are, because they modify the official memory of that historical period and inform the form of the artworks. I can briefly interrupt myself to tell a little story from a recent conversation that was thankfully recorded with Šeškus, where I kind of I was keen to slightly to make a slight kind of provocation, and I was saying to him, some of your more abstract images look almost like Jan Dibets, or they're almost Stan Bracagian. And he was like, this juxtaposition of the completely abstract light, kind of completely kind of erased real and the everyday that is kind of in this picture along the vertical planes. Obviously, I cannot show them, unfortunately. He was saying these are specifically because of Braque, because of the crappiness of the Soviet equipment that I was using. So this is part of the way that that the social conditions inform the form of the artworks that I was really keen to present. Likewise, they are not just illustrations of art that deals with embodied subjecthood and lived experience as it pertains to larger debates in feminist, post-colonial, and queer theoretical discourses. Methodologically, they pose art historical problems that do not go away by simply narrating or describing them. They demand us to do theory, but also provide us with the necessary tools to do it through paying the closest possible attention to their materiality, phenomenality, their singularities, their effects, and their uses. As different art historians such as Mieke Ball, Bryony Fair, and Hubert Damisch have suggested in the past about, unfortunately, much more canonical works. As such, Poder's, Šeškus's, and Šontas artworks are visual forms of knowledge, yet unthought knowns. They act back on time that acted upon them. The particularity of their mode of address, their epistemic and aesthetic disobedience to a moment past or present, makes it difficult for us to assimilate them into the homogeneous narratives of regional Eastern European art historical past, whether that would be a neo-avant-garde, or to the broader genealogies of European post-war art history, or the contemporary discourses based on Western-centric theory without first modifying those discourses. And this is exactly what I'm getting to. Refusing the frameworks of belatedness or anachronism, Šonta is more than a late sidekick to the genealogy of Western queer photography documenting underground sexual practices. Šeškus is not a conceptualist photographer in the lineage of 1970s New York underground, and Anu Poder is not a belated post-minimalist, a Baltic Eva Hesse, if you may. If we were to read their bodies of work through this or similar lens, at best we would reaffirm the entrenched genealogies of modern and postmodern art, assimilating, smuggling Poder, Šeškus, and Šonta among many other Baltic artists that are still to be researched deeply in the Soviet era, as doubles, as counterfeits of their canonic counterparts. At worst, anachronistic versions in relation to processes in the West, latecomers to a party that is anything but finished. Repetition, doubling, seriality, deferral, obfuscation, and fragmentation, a set of techniques which the three artists shared render Šonta's, Šeškus's, and Poder's bodies of work as an active agent which is able to modify historical time that has passed through them. They produce untimely temporalities that are deliberately out of sync with the demands of the Soviet past and its artistic production or present contemporaneity. I might add it also is out of sync with demands to be contra directly and literally, those demands. Their untimeliness, i.e. difficulty to retrospectively assimilate them into the fabric of the past or the discourses of the present, all the while doing the works justice, narrating their particularity, showcases precisely their transformative possibility or the futural dimension of their untimeliness. They not so politely ask us as art historians and curators to translate them into the written word from a position that is not defined by its relation to any central power, to decenter the pull of hegemonic position, whether that of the Soviet Russian imperialism or the limitations of imagination that we can see in the homogenizing centrist liberal status quo of the Western art institutions more often than not. The weirdness, unbefittedness of works of these artists, but also many others that remain to be researched, furnish us with theoretical and affective tools to reconfigure, imagine a common Baltic history or a set of histories otherwise. Not from the perspective of inferior belatedness, irrelevant anachronisms, but one of agency and aesthetic defiance. Thank you.